Hello, and welcome back to what I believe, if I'm counting correctly, is the sixth episode in this Miramichi Historical Linkages podcast. And so we're very grateful that you're joining us today, wherever you may be. And as always, I am Sean McCarthy, and I'm joined today by Tasha Smith and Sarah Ward. And so last week, we talked a little bit about our time with Steve Heckbert and the beads, the porcelain beads that he showed us, and all the stories that surrounded them. So today we're kind of in a not dissimilar vein. We're starting to talk a little bit more about oral history and oral traditions. And we'll be doing this for the next couple of episodes. So you've got to look forward to. When I guess maybe to kind of start off with, I think very often in a time where so much is recorded, in this day and age where, whether it's written or it's recorded or, again, and presented as you're watching this right now, we often wonder where oral history kind of fits in this digital world, and how it's kind of grown and changed and adapted. So I think with some unique views on that, based on the conversation that we had before we started recording, I'm going to kind of throw things over to Tasha, because I know, Tasha, you've kind of found an interesting kind of meld between kind of traditional history and the oral tradition and our world, our digital world today.
Yes, I did find some pretty interesting things that intertwine oral traditions with technology. As you were saying, that oral traditions are very important to many cultures. And Sarah, please correct me if I'm not saying this correctly, or if you have anything to add in, please feel free. So from my research and understanding, oral traditions can be kind of broken down into three subcategories. You have your myths, which for the most part relate to creation stories, or some myths account for the organization of our world and society as it is today. Then we have legends, which relate mostly to particular places. They're most important for linking the people with the land, legends are. And then we have folklore, which folklore are usually used for more moral or social lessons for younger people, or just for amusement on those long winter nights, or it could be any night really. And throughout my research, I came across a couple of websites. One of them, who is a well-known artist, Brandon Mitchell. The website is birchbarkcomics.com, and he started this in about 2003, and he actually received his diploma for animation and design in Miramichi back in, I believe it was 2000. And he's wrote many comics that pertain to Indigenous culture, great for youth in public schools or just any age, doesn't have to be only youth. One of the books that stood out to me a few years back when I was taking the education program at St. Thomas University is called This Place, 150 Years Retold. It's a great website for any person to visit. Another resource I came across, it's called, and please correct me, Sarah, if you've heard this word before, Negweg Collective. And in Mi'kmaq, I've read that Negweg means growth. And this website, so it's nigwegcollective.com. And the collaborators on this website created an app back in 2018, I believe it was. And it's called Nidap, which in Mi'kmaq, Nidap is my friend. And there was two different apps, because I went to go download these apps. They seem absolutely wonderful, and I've been playing them just a wee bit. But there was two, and I downloaded them both. There was one for 2021 and 2022. And most of them seem the same so far. And these apps are like an interactive game for people to use and listen to the Mi'kmaq language. And it's how they pass oral traditions down. And there's an interactive map on there for Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey territories. And if you click on the little stars or the animals on certain geographical locations on this app, it will open it up and start telling you oral traditions that pertain to that particular place. Because as we know, or most or oral traditions, when you're storytelling, the details may vary and change depending on the community and the person explaining it, but the underlying truth, the message always stays the same. It's always passed correctly, whether your details vary a bit or not. And I noticed that for a lot of Indigenous communities, especially Mi'kmaq, Glooscap is a person, a reference in pretty much almost every folklore that I've come across. If it's not about Glooscap, it's about his extended family or the animals and the lessons that Glooscap wants to teach to our people. The app is called NEDAP Legends of the First Nations. That's the full name. So if you go to your Play Store, your App Store on your phone or iPad, and that one, from what I've found out, it's located in Red Bank. And I was kind of surprised because I've been going up there for a few years and I haven't heard about it. So I definitely am going to dive more into there. I even called my mom this morning. I was like, keep your ears open. Please, I'd like to learn more about this and kind of, make more people aware of it. I think it's a wonderful app, and for it to be out since 2018, it's like 2020 now. So 4 years already. My first time coming across it the past week. That's what I love about, digging into everything. Be perfect opportunities for me to pass it on to maybe like an Acadian or a Gaelic apps. It'd be cool to find some of those out too.
Yeah, and I mean, if our listeners, our viewers may have some ideas about, some of these things, please do feel free to let us know, to reach out in the comments below, or to shoot us an email. That's linkproject@beaubearsisland.ca. And like I say, maybe let us know about other things, websites, apps, things of this nature that might help us, kind of reconnect with that oral tradition in kind of, I guess, I don't want to say more modern, but maybe more digital ways. So.
I'm really happy to see that all these creative minds getting together to create new opportunities and innovating to keep up with our modern times, as you were saying, Sean, because it is really hard to take a culture that's so used to producing information or passing knowledge on for generations only orally to transferring over to written. When I was kind of researching, I came across, and it reminded me of what my professor used to say when I did my BA degree. And he said that Mi'kmaq symbols are best represented by referring to them as, I might pronounce this wrong, ideograms, instead of hieroglyphs, where hieroglyphs refer to Egyptian writing, that the glyphs pertain to a word, where did I wrote that down? A word, a syllable, or a sound. And when you do that, if you refer to it as the hieroglyph, it misrepresents what Mi'kmaq people are really trying to say. So by referring to it as an ideogram, it's a more appropriate term, because each character, it says, represents a concept which may be orally expressed with one or many words, which makes sense because Mi'kmaq have many ways of saying something depending on how you're trying to say that, if that makes sense. Does that sound accurate, Sarah, from what you've learned over the years?
Yes, I think it's most in First Nation language and culture. When we speak, our words are animated. So like storytelling, when we talk about certain, give out information, you can visualize your words in action, doing things. So when you said that about Red Bank having that NADAP, I think you say, I'm not making myself, I'm just as, I try to pronounce the words right too. Anyway, the website, I'm thinking like, that's nice because it actually is bringing life not only to the legends and the story, but it also gives life to the language and the environment, like, the people that live there, the history. So it's bringing it all out. And I think that's very, very interesting. It's the first time I heard about it too. And where I work with the young people in school districts, I said, that'll be a good resource to look at. And you actually did me a favor, but showed me something that I could put it to use. And I was we were at Dr. Logier Junior High this week, my husband and I, and we listened to the young people write their stories of Halloween, right? The story, their scary moment stories. And the young people are very creative. So there's certain stories that were set there. And there's one young guy that I watch. He's very detailed in his stories, and he gives all this emphasis in the presenting his stories. So after we talked about stories, when they went over the stories, and I caught myself talking about our group here, Miramichi Heritage Link, and I said, there's stories, we look for stories there. I said, it would be nice because you are young people. I said, you were born fresh here on the Miramichi. I said, it would be nice to talk to your parents, your grandparents, to document some of those stories that you can save for your generation, for your family, for your community. I said, finding histories and history book is good, but we also need to look at and give credit to the historians in our community. And I said, and that's what our goal is. We're trying to do in this project is give life and give stories and give foundation to the community. So when you said that, Natasha, I said, I think it really did a good job. This is very interesting information for me.
Good. I'm so happy to help. That makes my heart so happy to know that it can help other youth in the schools that you work at. I'm so glad I came across it. Just,
So which organization Red Bank is it from? Do you know?
Well, that's the thing. That's why I called my mom up this morning. I was like, what's going on? But the address, it said 2114 Micmac Road, Red Bank First Nation. So my mom's like, your aunt's 2100 or something. I was like, well, so we were trying to calculate in our head all the people we know go along that road and where it would sit. My mom made a comment that it may relate to Jordan's principal address in that area, but I'm not quite sure. But if you find anything, Sarah, send me a message and I'll do the same for you.
yeah, maybe we'll have them come on as a guest.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. They would do a way better job, give it justice to the description of that app, that's for sure.
They'll be promoting their cause, their whatever their information is. And it also gives strength to our stories and our research.
Absolutely. Oh, that gets me going. I want to know about like Acadian and Gaelic ones too. I'm like, please make some apps so we can know all these apps. I was downloading a whole bunch of different language ones the other day. I was like, I better slow down. When am I going to have the time to go on all these apps? But I will make the time.
I notice that when I search for things, it's mainly in the Southwest or in the West Coast of Canada. It's where you hear a lot of digital information or modern information that's been digitized, but right. I find not much here, and it's good to hear that it's starting, and especially if it's starting along the river. That's great,
right? Connection to home for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's what I was telling the young people at the Indigenous students at the high school here in Miramichi. I said, you are the groundbreakers. I said, there are things that have never been done. You can do. You can give voice to certain things. I said, you can do some crafts, or you can do some like digitize. And I was telling them about a young lady there back in New Mexico, in Arizona. She was introduced to doing be the commentator for the Phoenix Sun, but she did it in Navajo. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if the Mi'kmaq students or somebody in Mi'kmaq do that same thing? I said, you are the groundbreakers. You guys have a plain canvas that you can paint on and do something with your life.
And I think, rooting everything, here, I think that's so, as you say, that's so important. I think that's something that we don't often understand. Well, certainly I didn't understand. You know what I mean? That oral history really does is that we have these grand narratives, in history, but so very often, and so in addition to kind of preserving tradition and knowledge, but it also grounds so much in our community. These are things that happen here to people that we know, to people that who know people we know, and it really kind of brings that into, and it allows us to feel connected. And I think these kind of advances allow younger people to kind of get access to it, because I know so many people that I talk to, and I myself, what I mean, come to the understanding of, wanting to hear these stories and wanting to understand and these things when the people who can tell them to us are going or are gone. I know myself, like I say, what I mean? I wish I had spent more time with my grandparents, who I think I've mentioned that before on the podcast, but again, like I say, when I was young, I didn't take that time, which I should have done. I regret it today, and I think there's a lot of other people out there that are much the same. And when you were talking about kind of Gaelic traditions and things of this nature, it made me think of, I was talking to one gentleman, and he was talking about Halloween, which again, for you listeners, is coming right up for us. But by the time you're listening to this, will have already passed. But used to talk about, that like very, very many years ago, in the oral traditions, the traditions kind of around, Halloween and it being linked to kind of All Souls and all of that. And, the idea of people would go and they would dress up as people, as ancestors. And, and the trick or treat idea was, according to this gentleman, you went to the house, and if they knew who you were, they would be rewarded. But if you didn't recognize, the people, you didn't recognize your ancestors or ancestors in the community, there was a trick that was going to come upon the house. The light of knowledge had gone. You had forgotten, your history in that way. So I find that really interesting. That, this is, yeah. So again, kind of now it's also kind of timely for us, not for you, dear listener, but yeah. That's it. That again, that that it's these things that help us to kind of remember our past and connect with it.
Yeah, and another thing too, I think going back to what Ashley said about the legends, the stories, the myth of that from Indigenous perspective, we hear so much in the media, and we hear so much information about Indigenous people, about residential school, Indian day school, the 60s school. We hear a lot of that information we've given, but we're more than that. We have a rich culture. We live lives every day, and we have families. So stories like these little apps to tell the myths and the legend and story, it brings us to another level than having to relive these traumas. We have to appreciate culture and make changes. Like, our young people don't have to know what happened in the history. That they need to have the knowledge, but they don't need to relive it. They can live the happy childhood that some of us didn't have.
Right. That's so true, Sarah. I agree with that. Because of course we need to focus on the traumas in order to move past it as a whole. But like you were saying, that is not just who we are. That is just a part in our story. But this other parts that we need to know about, like you were saying, is our traditions and the information we had before our traumas. We need to learn about our pre-contact and then why some of our relatives are the way they are today, if that makes sense, if that's proper wording. The reason why they make the choices they make today is because of the traumas that they went through.
Having some understanding and empathy.
Yes, yes, understanding. Thank you, Sarah. That's exactly it. Having the understanding and then understanding where your roots are from, like Sean was saying, the connection you have with your ancestors and your people and in your land, the land that you travel amongst. That's where legends would come in, right?
Yeah. And then when Sean said that about their recognizing your relatives, the Halloween story,
Yeah.
um, in that stories that the kids were telling, I asked them, I said, where did Halloween come from? I said, do you have your own information where Halloween came from? And they're going on like the saint, somebody, I'm not Catholic, so I'm not familiar. They meant some saint, which I didn't, I can't remember the name of the saint, but, and then so would that be coming from there? I said, I don't know, as I can't tell you because I'm not Catholic, so I don't know, so I don't know the history of that. And then, so I told them, says, well, from my background, I said, I'm Navajo. I said, and I said, my grandfather's part Navajo and he's Mexican. So some of those Halloween stuff comes from the Day of the Dead. But as soon as I said that, there's this young Filipino kid that was in the classroom. He goes, yeah, how come I didn't know that? Because that's what we do in the Philippines too. And he started telling the story, like, which was interesting. I'm thinking, like, we talk about the main foundation of cultures on the Miramichi that I guess established the Miramichi what it is today. But we're also having newcomers, right? Yes. That are moving here. So they have their story that are similar to some of the stories we have here. So anyway, but the young boy tells the story, says, oh yeah, I remember that. Why did I forget? Like, he's like, kind of like, so I didn't know that. Well, it was fun anyway. Had a good laugh.
Oh. Speaking of traditions, my little one, my youngest, is going to be doing her school concert soon, and I don't know exactly what it's going to be about, but she has a line to say, and it's talking about when they're doing their little play. She's like, well, why don't we take a moment to learn about each other's traditions and whatnot? So I thought that was a really, I'm excited to see how this play turns out. I'll fill you guys in afterwards, but it just connects to like traditions right now. So I'm like, it's nice to see that public schools, even that young in elementary, are promoting different cultural traditions and backgrounds. Like you were saying, Sarah, it's just, that makes me more happy to know that.
And that's what my husband says, that we never had this when I was going to school, and it's good to see that things are changing. He says some of these difference of cultures were never seen. It was just like, you learn this is what it is, and that was it. But he says, right. Him growing up here, he says, these are good changes.
Very good changes. Like you said, the inclusion of everything instead of the one track. What are those called? Those little horse blinders on? Or kind of like open them up. Take them right off.
Well, looking at the clock here, I see we're coming up on the last few minutes of this episode. We'll be back again next week as we hear the Mirac phone ring in the other room next to the office. But yeah, so we'll be back again next week to talk a little bit more about this. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll have a special guest. So stay tuned for that. But any final thoughts, Tasha, Sarah, before we draw to a close on this one?
We appreciate you listening and joining us each week, or if it's your first time, thank you so much. We hope you join again. I hope you like our craziness.
We actually do our work at the top of our head as something we've learned or something we discovered during that week. So be patient with us. We're learning.
We learn with you.
This is very true. That's it. All right. So with that, we hope that you'll join us next week. So maybe, like I say, I mean, if opportunity allows, as my uncle used to tell to me an old story from my family. He used to say, "I'll tell you a story about Johnny McGorry if you promise not to speak in the middle of it." So maybe next week I will do just that. I guarantee you that the story will end much more abruptly than you think, and probably will not be satisfactory in any way. But yeah, you can stay tuned for that, and we will see you then. All the best.
See you. See you.